We talk about a dilemma. A dilemma is two horns. And these two horns, the politician sees the beast with the two horns coming, and then he handles the one horn and hopes that he's not going to be hit by the other horn. Yeah. And once he handled the one horn, he turns to the other without knowing that the first horn has already grown again. That's what you call a dilemma. And this is a very good, very useful concept. And it sort of describes the reality of policymakers much better than this intellectual sort of total distortion of there being intelligent people who had a view of everything. And they can explain to the policymakers what they have to do, and then they do it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Aufe Bunga Bunga, the global politics podcast at the end of history. My name is Alex Hochuli. It's Wednesday, the 29th of September. I'm joined, as usual, by Philip Cunliffe. Hello, Philip.
Hi.
And by George Hoare. Hi, George.
Hey, looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too, because we will very shortly have on the line Wolfgang Streeck, who, if you don't know, he's a leading German public intellectual, sociologist, and emeritus director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies in Cologne. And this is a special episode, I guess an out-of-series episode, because we are looking at what's just happened in the German elections last weekend. And this is a bit of a follow-up as well from the preview we did last week. But I guess before we call up Wolfgang Streeck, just to set up what has actually happened and I guess how to understand this election. So this was the first election in which Angela Merkel was not going to run again, and she had been in power since 2005. Her CDU party, running under a different leader, lost effectively, but the Social Democrats, the SPD, didn't seem to exactly win. They came out first, but what has actually happened in the new landscape of German politics is an incredibly fragmented one. Instead of the effective duopoly of the big center-right and center-left party, you have a much more fragmented field in which the Greens scored well. You also have the liberal or neoliberal Free Democrats there. You have the populist right, AfD, and, in last place, Die Linke, who did very badly. But overall, this was an election fought on the basis of the promise of continuity. And there was something kind of retro 90s, 2000s about this election, at least as far as I could tell, in that it was fought over a very narrow center ground, trying to eke out little advantages for one party or the other, each of them promising competence. And not just competence as a party, but competence as an individual leader, the person who wanted to be chancellor. And so with that in mind, we have to ask ourselves, of course, has Germany genuinely been unshaken by the sort of populist upsurges that we've seen elsewhere in Europe? And what does it mean, in fact, for Europe? Because as our guest, Wolfgang Streeck, has recently written, that a lot of what has kept Europe together over the past decade and a half of crises has been Merkel's virtuoso performance as a Ponzi artist of political desire, an issuer of fiat trust, if not fiat money, mistress of postponed debt settlement, and unmatched champion of the discipline of political imposture, which is a great turn of phrase.
Yeah, he's talking, the centrality of Merkel, not only to German politics, but also to the European Union and especially the Eurozone and the era of crisis through which it's gone since 2008 and through the sovereign debt crisis of 2015, 16 and so on. She's central to it. So she is this, she's a very peculiar political figure, so dominant in so many ways, and at the same time so ambiguous, so and with such little kind of ideological definition. And that quote that you just read out captures it very well.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, last time we spoke to Wolfgang, we talked a little bit about his book Critical Encounters and some of the analyses there already, particularly, I guess, of Merkel's skill as this kind of master bourgeois politician, very astute reading of German politics, and particularly, I guess, the relationship between obviously Germany and the EU, Germany and France, and all the power politics which they engage in. I think, a great person to talk to about the implications of this election on the EU and the rest of Europe and wider as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems that to a large extent, the art of politics in Germany has been a matter of kind of treading water. But we're going to also try to look at what is emerging that might be new. We're going to talk a little bit about culture wars, whether US style culture wars are emerging in Germany. And then later on, towards the end of the episode and in the bonus content, which will be over on patreon.com/bungcast, the big question about the end of neoliberalism. In fact, phrased as a question, is neoliberalism ending? We're going to ask Wolfgang what he thinks about that. And even beyond that, whether capitalism itself has any more road to run. I'm just going to read out another great quote from Wolfgang Streeck, which is from a recent piece of his in the Sidecar blog of the New Left Review. These are all in the show notes if you want to check those out. The collective costs of running capitalism may by now have once and for all exceeded what societies can extract from capitalism to cover them, to pay for social peace, the formation of patient workers and satisfied consumers, the preparation for and cleaning up after surplus producing production, the extension and defense of markets and property rights in distant countries, etc., etc. So that's a big question. Have the collective costs of running capitalism exceeded what societies can extract from capitalism? So anyway, very excited to discuss this with Wolfgang, and we're going to call him up right now. All right, so this is myself, Alex, Phil, and George, and we're delighted to be joined once again by Wolfgang Streeck. Hello, Wolfgang, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me. The last time it was great fun, and I look forward to it being the same today.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we're delighted that you were able to join us to talk about, about the German election that happened at the end last weekend. Unfortunately, maybe it's not such an epochal election in the way that maybe some might have expected. So, I mean, I guess just to start off, did Scholz, the leader of the SPD, win as a sort of Merkel too, as the continuity candidate, as most of the reporting, I think, has it? Is that your understanding of events as well?
Yeah, if we talk about the surface of all this, and I think in today's politics, you have to clearly distinguish between what the media and the public relations agencies are performing on the surface of the political system and what is underlying all of this. In the German case, or in the case of this election, 3 months ago, everybody thought that the SPD putting up a candidate for chancellor was an act of despair and lunacy. It's completely impossible that they could possibly win. And the assumption was that somehow the Christian Democrats, whatever they did, on the strength of Merkel, would win with whoever candidate they would put up. So then the strange things happened. As I said, on the surface, the Christian Democrats put up a sort of dismally bad candidate. The Greens put up a woman of 42 years of age, who has never been in any government position and who nobody outside the party actually knew. And then, of course, there was this guy Scholz, who was nominated by the left-wing party presidents, although he was generally seen as the most right-wing social democratic politician, if not on earth, then really in Germany. Now then you can tell a complex story how this thing evolved to a point where suddenly Scholz came out ahead of the Christian Democratic candidate, and the Greens, who had initially, when everybody was keen to get to know this candidate, was around 30% in the polls, and then ended up with 17 or whatever they ended up with, within a matter of three months. And this should show us how volatile politics has become, and how little it says about the underlying political forces. Let me maybe point to two things more on the margin that might have been decisive in a number of ways. First of all, the AfD, the right-wing party, kept its position around 10%, even though the refugee crisis is now 5 years back, and this was the birth hour of this party. These 10%, you could say 6 to 8 of them might have voted for the Christian Democrats if that party hadn't existed and the Christian Democrats hadn't had the kind of policy that they had. So they now became the strongest party in East Germany, which was something that was slowly developing over the last years. The Linkspartei, the left party, was almost halved from 9.2 to 4.9. And it was really the disaster of this party that shapes the outcome of this election. Many of the left party voters went over to the Social Democratic Party, thereby possibly causing the Social Democrats to have more votes than the Christian Democrats, who lost, as I said, to the AfD. And moreover, much worse, the left party lost its strongholds in East Germany almost everywhere, and the new regional East German party now is clearly the AfD, and the left party no longer.
Yeah.
So then let me say one final thing, just to tell you how dismal the situation of this party is. If you look at young people, first-time voters, among them, the two parties that scored highest in the 20%, 23%, are the Liberal Free Democrats and the Greens. And the two parties that scored lowest among this group are the AfD at 8% and the Linkspartei at 9%. If you look at the voter profile of the Linkspartei, you see something bizarre, which is that with people without more than a basic school education, they drew 2% of the vote. With sort of intermediate degrees, between 3 and 4%, and with people with university degrees, 6%, and that is supposed to be the party of the losers in the German capitalist modernization process. So absolutely. And now I'll stop in a second, but I just want to say that the disappearance of this party sort of was the crucial, the pivotal event to simplify the politics of this new parliament. Because with the Linkspartei basically disappearing, there was no possibility anymore for the Social Democrats and the Greens to form a government together with the Linkspartei, which neither the Greens would have wanted nor Scholz. But inside these parties, there might have been pressure to set up a left government. Impossible now, which reduces the thing to two possible coalitions, both of which include the Free Democrats and the Greens. And the question is whether the party of the Chancellor will be the Christian Democrats or the Social Democrats. That's the game that is now being played out.
Yeah, I mean, this fragmentation is pretty remarkable, but also the fact of how personalized the election seemed to be as well. You know, appeals based on the personal qualities of the leader, and it seemed to be that something that Scholz was even aware of. I think he said before the election that only minor changes in voter behavior can create completely new constellations. So it seemed to be, an awareness at least that they wouldn't need to make necessarily a very broad appeal or win over new voters, that only minor shifts were possible. And in all this, it sort of reminded me a little bit of Britain in the 2000s, in the way that it was so based on personal appeals and appeals based on on competence, basically.
That's a general thing. Think of the book by Chris Bickerton and Invernizzi on techno populism, and that's the trend that you observe in a number of countries. Exactly what you just described. Now one has to say that neither the Christian Democrats nor the Social Democrats ever aspired to win something anywhere close to a majority. So the best for the Social Democrats would have been 25% after they scored at 18 or 17 3 months ago. For the Christian Democrats, it was different. They had hoped to end up at around 30, but again, nothing anywhere near to a sort of overwhelming personal victory for the candidate. Yeah, fragmentation is a word for this, but then you also see that the left, on the left side, the capacity to fragment, so to speak, has almost completely disappeared, and the Linkspartei is in the worst crisis it ever was in, and it might basically break apart as a result of this, and then become a political non-entity. In that sense, it is very important to understand that if Scholz becomes chancellor, this is not a move of the political system of Germany to the left. He will have to govern with the Greens, who increasingly turn out to be sort of what I once called the vegetarian division of the Conservatives.
Yeah, very good.
and not only with them, but also with the Free Democrats, who have already claimed the office of the finance minister. And if you look at Scholz, Scholz was the finance minister, or still is, and in Germany we have a 5-year budgetary planning. If you look at the 5-year planning of the federal budget, then the Free Democrats, the Christian Democrats, everybody could sign this. Yeah, it's like it follows the debt brake, which is in the German constitution, and the Chancellor Scholz will certainly hold any finance minister that he'll have in the cabinet to stick to the 5-year planning that he had responsibility for.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude, in the 3 years, in the last 3 years, in the 3 years beginning 2 years ago and including the planning for the next year, Germany has taken up additional debt to the tune of, I think, 40% of the whole debt of the European Union. The 75 billion recovery plan that they passed last year. It's an enormous sum. And under the budgetary planning, the expenditures of the federal government will have to be cut by 40% within the next 2 years, which is completely, utterly impossible, given, for example, the need to repair the damages of climate change and so many other things. So I just want to tell you, these constraints exist for any government that might come in, regardless whether Laschet or Scholz is the chancellor.
So I want to come on to the wider impact of these fiscal constraints just in a bit, but actually just briefly, I did want to ask you a little bit further about the problems of Die Linke, because this fragmentation even within it, or as you said, that it might split in two. Is that along the lines of basically a division between the sort of a vision of it being a party of movements, of the party of activists, and then the party representing the old working class, especially in the East? I mean, is that more or less the division that you were referring to?
Yeah, it's hard. It's really very hard to say. Sarah Wagenknecht, who may be known more or less also outside Germany, she tried to get the party to become the voice of those who are the losers in the capitalist modernization process that has been going on in Germany for some time now. Not just old people, but also basically also in the East. But she was sort of pushed into the corner, and the bill that the party has to pay is that its older voters in the East, also the younger ones, sort of moved away from the party and very often landed in the corner of the AfD. Yeah. Sort of protest against capitalist rationalization of all sorts, or modernization. You can also say cultural modernization, where people feel left out and where they have the feeling that they're being despised by the elite. Especially Angela Merkel was a person who was sort of seen like that in East Germany. She coming from East Germany herself, and then having moved over to the other side, so to speak. No, this is serious, and I think they will not be able to recover what used to be their original base. Then they will be dependent on the university population basically in West Germany, and there I would say the Greens are far ahead of them, because the Greens match sort of a worldview that is different from a worldview that reminds you of a socialist idea of a society. They are individualistic, they are sort of morally moved, they are against strict organizations, all this sort of libertarian culture that is characteristic of this. This is why I think among first-year voters, the Linkspartei doesn't cut anything. Yeah, the very few people vote for them, and for them, for the young, the Linkspartei and the AfD do not look completely different. They try to have a sort of obligatory worldview. They are collectivistic, whereas young Green voters and also FDP voters so emphasize personal liberty and all of these things. One effect of the COVID policies of the government might well have been that they drove some of this group into the arms of the Free Democrats. You would not have found these people with the Linkspartei, which emphasized solidarity and the obligation to get inoculated as an act of solidarity with the rest of the people. You understand? This is
and so just to clarify, the FDP were more skeptical of kind of activism on COVID. Is that right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They not openly, but they had one leading figure who kept saying that all of these, that first of all, the prominent jurist who insisted that each and every one of these measures had to be measured against the Constitution and the rights of personal liberty. And the Free Democrats are historically a sort of civil rights party, if you want. Yeah, and they use this to not to oppose inoculation, but to emphasize that people who do not get vaccinated should not be overly repressively treated. Yeah, and that sort of pulled enough, I think, people from certain groups to actually, this was a party that 4 years ago everybody thought would sort of wither away. Yeah, now the Linkspartei is withering away.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you said before, where you said there's the need to distinguish between the ways in which the kind of the polling companies and also the media treat the question of the election, and then the underlying shifts. So how would you draw that distinction? I suppose you've mentioned voter fragmentation as one of those underlying shifts that isn't captured in the discussion. Are there others as well? I suppose I want to kind of start thinking about some of the big picture kind of changes, I suppose, of which how they're expressed through this more fluid politics.
Yeah, what I had in mind was you could say even a layer more below than that, underneath that, where you find the structural constants, and it is these structural constants that you do not need to talk about, but as a political party, you are almost forced to treat them as given.
Yeah.
Because if you do not do so, then you sort of end up in the corner of the lunatics, so to speak. And I want to maybe mention 2 or 3 of them. One is the fact that Germany, and this is something that you need to understand if you want to understand German politics, the fact that Germany is the wealth pole of the European Monetary Union.
Yeah.
And there is an underlying, how do you say, a self-evident fact that German politics has to be directed, on German policy has to be directed at keeping monetary union intact.
Yeah.
Yeah, that comes with a bias in the direction of the strength of the German economy, which is the manufacturing sector export-oriented, which needs a stable currency and a favorable exchange rate. As long as you have monetary union with countries like Italy, Spain, or whoever, you will have a very low external exchange rate. Yeah. If we had to have our national currency, that compared to the euro would maybe be 20 or 25% valued upwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then anything that comes up in terms of Brussels, European solidarity, and so on, especially also where trade unions are in your organization, like in the left, in the left party to some extent still, you have to observe the political imperatives of what you can say the ruling social bloc in Germany, which includes industry and export-oriented trade unions. Yeah, that's one thing. Then another thing that you, Philip, might be particularly interested in is the foreign policy, the security policy situation of Germany, located between 3 nuclear powers, Britain, France, and Russia, with a 4th nuclear power, the United States, having 40,000 troops on German soil and an unknown number of nuclear warheads, with an unknown number of carrying systems. Yeah. So then you have a situation where Germany can have no nuclear arms at all under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that Germany had to sign in the early 1960s as a condition of regaining some of its national sovereignty. So when the United States put pressure on Russia, the Russians have no other recourse than to improve, to modernize their nuclear arms. which sort of scares the shit out of the Germans, who therefore cannot rely on the French to counter this, because the French nuclear arms are only for French purposes, which the French keep repeating. So they depend on the Americans. So then one thing that Scholz did during the campaign, when he tried to scare off the Linkspartei, was that he told them that he could include them in a government only if they declared their allegiance to NATO.
Yeah.
And of course, this is something that the Linkspartei cannot do. Because of its membership. I think the leaders apart from Sarah Wagenknecht would have been willing to confess to almost anything in order to be included. But Sarah couldn't do this, and her people.
So how do you see, given the structural constraint, like you say, of German domination of the Eurozone, and Germany's dependence on the Eurozone for its economic success, how do you see that connecting with the fragmentation of the political system? Do you think that fragmentation and the coalition building that's going to follow, is it going to make it more difficult for Germany to steer the Eurozone over the next few years?
I don't think so. No? I know this is a speculation that many people engage in, and it is an attractive speculation. But all of these parties that are now going to form the government will be acutely aware that they have to do, in the words of Mario Draghi, whatever it takes in order to keep the Eurozone alive. Yeah. Now there will be a difference in style, and the difference in style is what this fragmentation is all about. A Scholz government will sort of go to Brussels and celebrate themselves for their solidaristic attitudes about Europe, whereas a Laschet government will do basically the same, because Laschet is from Aachen. If you know Germany, Aachen is sort of the westernmost big city, very Francophile and so on. But both of them, apart from what they do on the surface, will negotiate very hard, the same way they used to, Merkel used to do without most people noticing, to bring down the price of maintaining the monetary union to the lowest possible level. You can say they will do whatever it takes, but they are certainly keen not to do more than it takes. And if I may add this, in a sort of quasi-imperial relationship as we're observing here, it is the important point for Eurozone cohesion is not so much to heal the economic problems of countries like Italy or Spain. The important point is to give enough incentives to the political classes, to the political elites of these countries to hang on to Brussels. And this is different. These are two different things. For Germany, the 20 years of stagnation of the Italian economy, with an enormous decline on all sorts of fronts, is not so important as was Salvini perhaps rising to power on a program of leaving the Eurozone. Then all the alarm bells went on. And all sorts of things were sort of discussed. What the hell can we do so that this guy doesn't come to power? And the same thing is true with respect to France.
Yeah. So on that, actually, I would be interested to hear about, I suppose, more about the German-French connection. But in particular, you mentioned the Germany's geopolitical status. I was wondering how you see that playing out in light of France's humiliation with the the so-called AUKUS Pact. So Britain is selling its nuclear submarines to Australia as part of this pact in Asia, and it squeezed France out of a submarine deal.
Yeah.
And Macron, in response to that, has made this big push for strategic autonomy. How do you think that's going to play out with whatever shape the new German government takes? How's it going to play out in Germany?
Yeah, there's nothing new about this. The important thing is that from a German perspective, I think for 20, 30 years, the game was always the same, namely to remain on good terms with both France and the United States, and thereby play all sorts of sometimes extremely devious schemes to fool especially the French about the extent to which the Germans are willing to play on their side.
Yeah.
If Germany wants to be the hegemonic power of the European Union, then it cannot do this on its own. It has to do this behind the French as a sort of cover for them. Because for historical reasons, the Eurozone can be governed, if it is governed by Germany, it must be governed by Germany in connection with France. So they need to buy in the French as a in Germany, it's called the French-German tandem, yeah, where the French sit in front and the Germans sort of work hard in the back,
yes,
and sometimes tell the front rider to go left or to go right. So no, this is not new at all, and what will happen is that see, next year in April, Macron will have to be re-elected.
Yeah.
And the Germans will do anything they can do in order to help him win this election. For this purpose.
And what would that mean kind of concretely then?
Symbolic acts. For example, set up a joint military unit to fight the terrorists in Mali. Or something, so that Macron can say, we now have a joint, how do you say, a joint strategic orientation. Macron speaks of the sovereignty of Europe, meaning an extended sovereignty of France.
Yeah.
Now, during the election campaign, Scholz, who really wants to not let this sort of strange relationship become a subject of public debate. Scholz used to talk about a sovereign Europe, not European sovereign, but he wants a sovereign Europe. Nobody knows what that is. Yeah, nobody knows what that is. But the French are pleased to hear it.
Yeah.
Now, if I may add one more observation, which comes up today.
Sure.
Is that on the traditional conservative side, Macron is not a traditional conservative, as we all know. He's sort of something technocratic in between. But on the traditional conservative side, now this guy Michel Barnier, who was the negotiator on behalf of the European Union with Britain, he seems to be getting ready to run against Macron on a platform of deep reform of the European Union, emphasizing that it can no longer be accepted that Germany, sort of pretending to work with others, actually runs the Eurozone or the European Union. I'm fully in agreement with this. Yeah. because I don't want the Germans to take the blame for the demise of a structure that is unsustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you find some sort of hard bargaining position plus the willingness to insist on meaningful changes, even on the part of the French sort of political class. And Barnier is really a very, very well connected figure in France. So here is perhaps something brewing that might be an equivalent to the Brexit.
So qualified support for Michel Barnier?
On my part, I think what I've read about what he said, he, for example, said, we have not learned the lesson from Brexit. Yeah. And he was close, very close to observing it. And what he meant was, if I understood that right, that we have to understand that Brussels cannot govern other countries, that European countries can sort of cooperate, but they cannot govern each other. And then in the next sentence, he said, Germany has been trying to govern France. And we should end this situation. I think that's a perfectly acceptable analysis. A little bit overstated. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk maybe a little bit more about this in a second, but before that, I want to take the opportunity to double back and talk about maybe cultural divisions in Germany in light of the election, because one thing that this election has brought up, obviously, is the seeming end of the big catch-all Volkspartei and a shift to voting patterns based more on, well, maybe more on milieus and on lifestyle. The parties are oriented toward maybe the Greens being vegetarian conservatives, as you've called them, or in any case we can all imagine or conjure up images of the stereotypes of each party voter without much difficulty, even if you're not familiar with Germany. Wherever you're listening, listeners will be able to conjure up their own images of these little marketing boxes basically into which we're put. Is that's been the case basically? I mean, you agree with my description there of Germany?
It is the way you describe it. It is not just limited to Germany. The big parties are breaking up, either internally, so that they cannot formulate a coherent policy anymore, or their electorates fragment. And the reason for this, if I may say that, is obviously this. I mean, the post-war Western democracy consisted of basically two center parties, one to the left and one to the right. Each of them was a coalition of different groups, but that coalition could be kept together by the leadership. If you look at the conservatives, then I would say there were three sort of strands inside the sort of typified, ideal, typical conservative People's Party. This was, on the one hand, sort of endorsement of private capitalism. Secondly, however, also endorsement of a sort of quasi-Catholic, patriarchal view of family life. Yeah. And thirdly, anti-communism. And these three things sort of could be kept together for a while, and you could form a majority on this basis. But if you get to the 1990s, with the amazingly, first of all, the disappearance of communism as a glue for these parties. Secondly, the amazingly rapid capitalist rationalization of these societies, leading to the breakup of the patriarchal family, women going into the labor market, sort of totally sort of liberal social structure, and capitalism accelerating its development in such a way that you couldn't conceive of it anymore as a national sort of wealth-creating engine. It was something else in the hyper-globalization world that Danny Rodrik has described. So then these parties began to disintegrate. And the moment in Germany was when Helmut Kohl lost to Gerhard Schröder, of all people, who had run this campaign. Listen, and this is sort of very indicative of this. It is not important to distinguish between a social democratic and a conservative economic policy. The important difference is between good economic policy and bad economic policy. Yeah. So there we are in this world. And then comes Angela Merkel, and so in a very interesting way, delays the decomposition of the German Christian Democratic Party. Because, and for some time she still remained at 40% when the Democristiana in Italy had already disappeared, and the Christian Democrats in the Netherlands were disappearing also. What she did was she had no relationship to any of the previous cliques and sections and traditions that formed the Christian Democratic Party. Obligated to no one, coming like out of the blue, 35 years old, having spent her 35 years in the German Democratic Republic, coming out and changing the style of politics from ideology and ideological ambitions, like we want this kind of society with decent families, heterosexual sex regimes, and all of these things. She didn't give a damn about all of it. She had two sort of visions from the beginning. Put together a credible electoral base, while at the same time proving your ability to deal one by one with any arising problems that might occur, not on the basis of principles, but on the basis of expediency, and then show to the rest of the world that you can handle everything. Yeah. So this, for example, her first government was a grand coalition. I remember very well the campaign when she almost lost to Schröder, but in the end won. And that campaign was run on a Margaret Thatcher neoliberal, hardcore neoliberal platform. Like, for example, basically effectively ending free collective bargaining, effectively ending worker participation on government boards, and so on. When she noticed that this brought her sort of close to electoral defeat, she completely, in a matter of a few weeks, sort of changed tack, 180 degrees, and began to social democratize, as they say, her party, with the help of the Social Democrats, who didn't understand that the extent to which she social democratized her party sort of sucked away their electoral potential.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Sorry, just to jump in, but that obviously you started off by answering that the glue of anti-communism was gone, and the impact that's had on Christian democracy. But I think it was interesting that in this election, as far as I understand, that the CDU did try some sort of red scare or red sock tactics against Die Linke, but I assume it didn't really have any purchase, did it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like it's always a mystery what people know and what they think and all of this. It is absolutely true that in the last 3 weeks of this campaign, the Christian Democrats, being desperate as they were, and I think trying in the last moment to lure away voters from the AfD, because this is their reservoir, 10%. They left the Christian Democrats. So then they painted a scare picture of a Scholz green left Linkspartei government, 3 coalition partners. And I think people not knowing much about all of these things, but when you tell them there is radicalism and they want to take away your whatever they want to take away, they don't think much. They don't want this. They don't want this. And it is true that it seems that the Christian Democrats were able to project to, let's say, 5% of the electorate that they would be the final defense, firm defense against this sort of government.
Yeah. So, I mean, in light of that and that sort of, I guess, symbolic politics completely disconnected from any material referent, I wanted to talk about culture wars, because it seems that over the past decade, political insurrections and populist upsurges ended up being channeled into, I guess, a more kind of culture war formation, effectively neutralizing their explosive potential. I mean, at least this is something that we've argued on this podcast and in our book, The End of History. And I think the example is pretty clear, at least in the US, where the Bernie and Trump moments devolved into fights over whatever, Black Lives Matter or whatever, or even in the UK, where Brexit became also a kind of culture war between self-identifying Leavers and Remainers, maybe even evacuating the democratic content that was there. So I wonder whether something similar is happening in Germany, maybe skipping over that populist moment, but that there is nevertheless a turn towards sort of culture wars. I don't know, on climate or on refugees or even maybe on COVID, something that you already mentioned.
Yeah, Germans are boring people, unlike the Brits who have these wonderful fights about Eton people who are, I don't know, homosexuals or not homosexuals. I can't really follow the details of these debates, but in Germany, Germany also, you have to say that on the cultural level, they take their cues from the United States and they import everything that happens there, and sort of 10 years later, it's there. The American culture wars and started. Not yet. It's not yet 10 years, but in the cultural sphere, it is sort of beginning. Didn't, however, have any impact on the election campaign, partly because the Greens stayed away sort of very, very carefully, even from the debate about gendering the writing of the German language. If you know German, you know that there's lots of opportunities, like in the Latin language also, there's lots of opportunities to insert sort of gender stars and all of these things. Like, no, they stayed away from it. It was not seen as a good way of collecting votes, but it may be coming. It may be coming, and it is coming in certain circles at universities. Universities, for example, have now all of them have special offices in charge of Gleichstellung, equal opportunity, you could say, but it's not really equal opportunity. It's like increasing the percentages of. Now in Germany, first of all, you had women, but now Germans, mostly speaking English now, speak about persons of color. So then you have to find voters for.
So, I mean, just in terms of the understanding of this, and I might come off sounding a little, maybe perhaps at the risk of sounding a bit conspiratorial on the question, the way I would understand it is that unlike in the 90s and 2000s, politics was basically kept a lid on through various, I guess, post-political means. And that the strategy today from a lot of elites, not necessarily in Germany, I'm not saying that this is the case in Germany, but it definitely seems to be the case in the US and in Britain to a certain extent, that the way of neutralizing discontent and populist upsurges is not through a direct depoliticization, but of channeling these questions into culture wars where they can't really have any material political effect, where it just becomes a shouting match. I mean, do you agree with that characterization?
For the United States and for Britain, yes. But Alex, you have to, what I said at the earlier in this talk, Germany is the sort of prosperity center of the European Monetary Union. So the kind of economic disparities that you have in the United States and also in Britain just don't exist, and they don't need to be fought by diverting the attention of people to the restrooms for the trans people. This is not a big thing as yet. During the election campaign, at one point, the Social Democratic chairman, they have two of them, and Scholz is not the chairman. He was not elected. They sort of organized a meeting with a group of very, very militant, I think, trans people, but I don't know what it was, or queer. They called us the queer such and such. And after this meeting, the two leaders of the party wrote an almost like a letter to them apologizing for, at some point, having misnamed one of these people because they didn't know that they were a man rather than a woman. And this sort of servile prose, unbelievable, and it came out, was in the press. And then Scholz, I think, told them to shut up and never, ever do this again during the campaign. Yeah. So you didn't hear about the queer Social Democrats anymore, not a single word. Mm-hmm. It will come back, I'm sure, especially if it turns out that under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the basic parameters of German policy will remain the way they were. Yeah? And then, at that point, you have to process the disappointment by channeling the critical energy into other subjects than climate change, for example.
Hello, listener. You've reached the end of this free episode of our conversation with Wolfgang Streeck. However, we did carry on the conversation looking beyond the immediate politics as well as the culture war to discuss some of the structural issues at question. Is neoliberalism ending? We asked Wolfgang, and went on to discuss capitalism's structural crisis. This conversation is available over at Patreon at patreon.com/bungacast. Subscribers get 2 original episodes per month, bonus content, and we also have our monthly reading club. Also coming up from us, the next parts of OK Bungar, The Problem of Generations, our 5-part series on generational conflict and generational consciousness. To have access to all of that, you'll also need to sign up at patreon.com/bungacast. We do hope to see you over there. Catch you later. Bye-bye.